in a world where empires rise and fall. One man dared to dream beyond the limits of the known world. He was a king, a warrior, and a visionary young leader who, against all odds, carved out one of the largest empires in history. His name was Alexander, and he would be remembered as the Great. But who was the man behind the legend? What drove him to conquer kingdoms, cross deserts, and even challenge the gods? This is the story of a man who sought to rule the world, and in doing so, would change it forever. In 356 BCE, in the heart of ancient Macedonia, a child was born who would go on to change the course of history. His name was Alexander. From the very start, those around him could sense something different about this boy. He wasn't just any child. He was the son of King Philip II, the powerful ruler of Macedonia. King Philip was a man of big dreams and even bigger ambitions. He wanted to make Macedonia the most powerful kingdom in the Greek world, and he was already making that dream a reality. But little did he know, his son Alexander would take those ambitions even further. Alexander's mother, Olympias, was a force to be reckoned with. She was a princess from Epirus, known for her strong will and deep spiritual belief. She believed her son was destined for greatness, and she wasn't shy about it. Legends say that the night before Alexander was born, Olympias dreamed of thunder and lightning, signs from the gods that her child would do extraordinary things. She raised Alexander with the belief that he was meant for something greater, and this belief would guide him throughout his life. Growing up in the royal palace of Pella, Alexander was surrounded by soldiers, scholars, and politicians. The palace was filled with talk of battles and strategy. While other children played games, Alexander was captivated by stories of great warriors and epic battles. He imagined himself in these tales, leading armies and achieving glory. Even as a boy, there was something different about Alexander. He was destined for greatness. From his father, Alexander learned the art of war and the importance of leadership. From his mother, he inherited a sense of destiny and divine purpose. Together, these influences shaped him into a leader unlike any other. Alexander was more than just a prince. He was a boy with a dream that would one day take him across the known world and beyond. This is the story of Alexander the Great, a story of ambition, courage, and destiny. A story that begins in the quiet city of Pella, but would soon stretch across continents and echo through the ages. By the time Alexander was a teenager, Macedonia had grown into a powerful kingdom under the leadership of his father, King Philip II. Philip's military genius had transformed Macedonia into a force to be reckoned with in the Greek world. But while Philip was busy expanding his empire, Alexander was quietly preparing for a future of his own, one that would take him far beyond the borders of Macedonia. Alexander was more than just a prince. From a young age, he was groomed for greatness. Philip ensured that his son was trained in the art of war, but Alexander wasn't just learning how to fight, he was also learning how to think. His education was entrusted to none other than the famous philosopher Aristotle, one of the greatest minds of the time. Aristotle taught Alexander not only about philosophy and science, but also about politics and leadership. Under his guidance, Alexander developed a deep understanding of the world and his place in it. Aristotle introduced Alexander to the works of Homer, particularly the Iliad, which became Alexander's favorite book. The stories of Achilles and the heroes of ancient Greece sparked something in Alexander's imagination. He saw himself as a modern-day Achilles, destined to achieve greatness on the battlefield. It wasn't just about conquering lands for Alexander, it was about becoming a legend. At just 16 years old, Alexander got his first taste of leadership. While King Philip was away at war, he left Alexander in charge of Macedonia. It wasn't long before Alexander faced his first challenge. A tribe called the Thracian Maedi rebelled against Macedonian rule, thinking they could take advantage of the young prince's inexperience. But Alexander was quick to act. He led his forces against the Maedi, crushed the rebellion, and founded a new city on their land, naming it Alexandropolis after himself. This was just the beginning of Alexander's rise to power. In 336 BCE, everything changed. At a grand celebration in Macedonia, King Philip II was assassinated. The kingdom was thrown into chaos. But at just 20 years old, Alexander stepped up and took the throne. He was young, but he was ready. The lessons he had learned from his father, his mother, and Aristotle had prepared him for this moment. Now he was the king, and he had a vision, one that would take him far beyond the borders of Macedonia. As soon as Alexander became king, he faced challenges from all sides. The Greek city-states, led by Thebes, saw Philip's death as an opportunity to break free from Macedonian control. They underestimated the young king. With swift and decisive action, Alexander marched his army into Greece and crushed the rebellion. Thebes was completely destroyed, with only its temples left standing as a warning to others. It was a brutal but effective message. Alexander was in charge now, and he would not tolerate disobedience. With Greece under his control, Alexander's gaze turned east. He had inherited his father's dream of conquering the mighty Persian Empire. But Alexander wasn't just content with following in Philip's footsteps. He wanted to surpass them. He dreamed of an empire that stretched across the known world, a legacy that would make him immortal. And with Greece firmly under his rule, he was ready to begin the journey that would define him as Alexander the Great. With Greece under his control, Alexander set his sights on a new and even greater challenge: the Persian Empire. The Persians were the most powerful empire in the world at the time, and their ruler, King Darius III, commanded vast armies and immense wealth. But Alexander was undeterred. He was determined to accomplish what no one before him had ever done: defeat Persia and claim its vast empire as his own. Alexander knew that the key to defeating Persia was to strike at its heart, but first he had to secure a foothold in Asia Minor. In 334 BCE, with an army of around 35,000 soldiers, Alexander crossed the Hellespont into Persian territory. His first test would come at the Battle of the Granicus River, where Persian forces were waiting to stop him. The Battle of the Granicus River was Alexander's first major victory against the Persians. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Alexander's brilliant tactics and fearless leadership led his troops to a decisive win. He personally led a cavalry charge across the river, cutting through the Persian lines with unmatched bravery. This victory sent a clear message: Alexander was not to be underestimated. With the Persian forces in retreat, city after city in Asia Minor fell to Alexander. Some surrendered without a fight, while others were taken by force. But everywhere he went, Alexander showed a remarkable ability to win the loyalty of the people. He didn't just conquer lands, he also knew how to rule them. He respected local customs and religions, and in return, many saw him not just as a conqueror, but as a liberator. In 333 BCE, Alexander faced his greatest challenge yet, the Battle of Issus. This time, King Darius III personally led the Persian forces, determined to crush the young Macedonian king. The Persians outnumbered Alexander's forces by a wide margin, and Darius was confident of victory. But Alexander had other plans. Using the terrain to his advantage, he launched a surprise attack that caught the Persians off guard. Alexander fought with incredible courage, leading his men from the front as always. In the heat of battle, he charged straight toward Darius, nearly capturing the Persian king. Darius fled the battlefield in panic, leaving behind his army and even his own family. It was a humiliating defeat for Persia and a stunning victory for Alexander. The Battle of Issus marked a turning point. Alexander had proven that he could defeat the mightiest empire in the world. Despite his fierce reputation on the battlefield, Alexander showed compassion to Darius's captured family. Instead of treating them as prisoners, he treated them with honor and respect, a move that won him admiration and loyalty. Alexander wasn't just a warrior, he was a ruler who understood the importance of winning hearts as well as battles. With Persia reeling from defeat, Alexander continued his march, moving south along the Mediterranean coast. One of his most difficult challenges came at the city of Tyre, a heavily fortified island stronghold. The siege of Tyre would test Alexander's patience and determination like never before. For 7 long months, Alexander's forces besieged Tyre. The city seemed nearly impossible to capture, but Alexander was relentless. He ordered his men to build a massive causeway, a bridge of earth and stone, to reach the island. It was an engineering marvel and a testament to Alexander's refusal to accept defeat. Finally, after months of fierce fighting, Tyre fell, and Alexander had secured the coast, cutting off Persia's access to the sea. With the Mediterranean coast under his control, Alexander set his sights on Egypt. Unlike Tyre, Egypt welcomed Alexander with open arms. The Egyptians had long been under Persian rule, and many saw Alexander as a liberator rather than a conqueror. When he arrived in Egypt in 332 BCE, he was crowned as pharaoh and hailed as a god. Here, in the land of the pyramids, Alexander founded the city that would bear his name for centuries to come, Alexandria. Alexandria would become one of the most famous cities in the ancient world, a center of culture, knowledge, and trade. It was a symbol of Alexander's vision for a united empire, one that blended the cultures of the East and the West. But even as he built his legacy in Egypt, Alexander's eyes were still fixed on his ultimate goal, the complete conquest of the Persian Empire. Alexander had already achieved more than most could ever dream of, but for him, this was just the beginning. Ahead lay the vast Persian heartland, and beyond that, even greater challenges. With his army behind him and his ambition driving him forward, Alexander the Great was ready to continue his conquest, one that would make him a legend for all time. By 331 BCE, Alexander had conquered much of the Persian Empire's western territories, but his ultimate goal remained ahead, the heart of Persia itself. King Darius III, humiliated by his defeats at the Granicus and Issus, had regrouped his forces for one final stand. This would be a battle for the future of the Persian Empire, a showdown that would determine who would rule over the vast lands stretching from Greece to India. The decisive battle would take place at Gaugamela, a flat, open plain in what is now northern Iraq. Darius chose this site for its strategic advantage. Here, his massive army, far larger than Alexander's, could use its full strength. Darius had everything: thousands of infantry, cavalry, and even war elephants. He was determined to crush Alexander once and for all. But Alexander was undeterred. He knew that numbers alone wouldn't win this battle. What he lacked in manpower, he made up for in brilliance. His plan was simple but daring. He would strike directly at Darius himself, forcing the Persian king into chaos. If he could reach Darius, the rest of the Persian army would crumble. The Battle of Gaugamela began with a massive charge from the Persian cavalry, but Alexander anticipated every move. With precision, he directed his troops, exploiting weaknesses in the Persian lines. Then, at the perfect moment, Alexander led his elite cavalry in a bold attack straight at Darius's position. The Persian king, seeing Alexander coming for him, panicked and fled the battlefield, just as he had at Issus. Without their leader, the Persian forces fell apart. Alexander had achieved the impossible. He had shattered the Persian Empire's might and claimed victory at Gaugamela. Gaugamela was the turning point. With Darius on the run and his empire in disarray, Alexander marched on the Persian capital cities. First, he took Babylon, a city of immense wealth and splendor. The people of Babylon welcomed Alexander as a hero, seeing him as a liberator rather than a conqueror. Babylon was just the beginning. From there, Alexander moved on to the ancient city of Susa, another jewel of the Persian Empire. But his greatest prize awaited him further east, the legendary city of Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persia and a symbol of its power. In 330 BCE, Alexander entered Persepolis, the richest city in the world. Its vast palaces and treasures were beyond anything Alexander had ever seen. But for all its glory, Persepolis was also a symbol of Persian oppression, and Alexander knew that to solidify his control, he needed to send a message. In a moment that would echo through history, Alexander ordered the burning of Persepolis. Some say it was a deliberate act of revenge for the Persian invasion of Greece over a century earlier. Others believe it was a drunken decision made in the heat of the moment. Whatever the reason, the burning of Persepolis marked the end of the old Persian order. With its flames, Alexander had symbolically and literally destroyed the heart of the Persian Empire. With Persia's capitals under his control, Alexander was now the undisputed ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. But Darius III was still alive, fleeing eastward in a desperate attempt to rally what remained of his forces. Alexander wasn't content to simply rule Persia. He wanted to bring Darius to justice and unite the entire empire under his rule. For months, Alexander pursued Darius across the rugged terrain of modern-day Iran. But before he could reach him, Darius was betrayed by one of his own satraps, Bessus, who captured and murdered the Persian king in a bid to seize power. When Alexander finally caught up with Bessus, he was furious. Darius, even in defeat, had been a king, and Alexander demanded justice for the man he had once called an enemy. Bessus was captured and executed, and with his death, Alexander became the undisputed ruler of Persia. But even now, with the entire Persian Empire under his control, Alexander's ambition was far from satisfied. He had conquered the known world, but to him, the world seemed limitless. Ahead lay the lands of Central Asia, India, and beyond, and Alexander, ever the explorer, ever the conqueror, was ready to push the boundaries of his empire even further. Alexander the Great had achieved more than anyone could have imagined, but his journey was far from over. Ahead lay new lands to explore, new battles to fight, and new challenges to face. With the world at his feet, Alexander was ready to continue his march into history, leaving a legacy that would endure for millennia. With Persia conquered, Alexander pushed further east. His journey took him through the harsh and unforgiving lands of Central Asia, where he faced new challenges, both from the terrain and from fierce local tribes. But Alexander's ambition knew no bounds. He was driven by a desire not just to conquer, but to explore the edges of the known world and beyond. In these remote regions, Alexander faced some of the toughest resistance of his campaign. The people of Bactria and Sogdia were fiercely independent, and they weren't about to let a foreign conqueror take their lands without a fight. For 2 years, Alexander and his men fought a brutal guerrilla war, enduring extreme conditions and relentless attacks. But Alexander's persistence paid off. One by one, the local leaders were defeated or brought into his fold, and these distant lands became part of his growing empire. By 327 BCE, Alexander had reached the edge of the known world, the borders of India. Here, he faced a new and mysterious land, with its own rich history and powerful kingdoms. But Alexander's ambition had not waned. He was determined to push even further into the lands of the mighty Indian kings. Alexander's most famous battle in India was fought at the Hydaspes River against King Porus, who ruled over a powerful kingdom. Porus's army was unlike anything Alexander had faced before. Massive war elephants towered over the battlefield, threatening to crush the Macedonian forces. But Alexander's strategy and courage once again won the day. Despite the ferocity of the Indian forces, Alexander emerged victorious. After the battle, Alexander did something remarkable. Instead of punishing King Porus, he treated him with honor and respect, even allowing him to continue ruling his kingdom as a vassal. This act of diplomacy showed that Alexander wasn't just a conqueror, he was a ruler who understood the power of loyalty and respect. But by now, Alexander's men were exhausted. They had been marching and fighting for years, thousands of miles from their homes in Macedonia. As they pushed further into India, morale began to falter. The soldiers longed to return home, and eventually they refused to march any further. For the first time in his career, Alexander had to turn back. Alexander agreed to return to Persia, but the journey home was no less perilous than his conquests. Leading his men through the deadly Gedrosian desert, Alexander lost thousands of soldiers to starvation, heat, and exhaustion. It was a grueling trek, and by the time they reached safety, the once mighty army had been reduced to a shadow of its former self. By 324 BCE, Alexander had returned to Babylon, the jewel of his empire. He was now the ruler of an empire that stretched from Greece to Egypt, from Persia to India. He had achieved more than anyone could have ever imagined. But Alexander was not content to rest on his laurels. He began planning new campaigns, this time to conquer Arabia and possibly even more distant lands. But Alexander's dreams of further conquests would never come to pass. In 323 BCE, at the height of his power, Alexander fell ill after a night of heavy drinking. His condition rapidly worsened, and within days, the great conqueror was on his deathbed. On June 10, 323 BCE, at the age of just 32, Alexander the Great died in Babylon. The cause of his death remains a mystery to this day. Some say it was poison, others believe it was a fever, and some even think it was the result of years of relentless campaigning. Whatever the cause, the world had lost one of its greatest leaders. With Alexander's death, his vast empire began to unravel. He had left no clear heir, and his generals, known as the Diadochi, soon fell into conflict, dividing the empire among themselves. The dream of a unified empire stretching from Greece to India was shattered, and over the years, Alexander's territories were carved into rival kingdoms. But while his empire may have crumbled, Alexander's legacy endured. He founded over 20 cities, including Alexandria in Egypt, which became a center of learning and culture for centuries. His conquests spread Greek culture across the known world, influencing everything from art and architecture to philosophy and science. This blend of cultures, known as Hellenism, would shape the course of history long after Alexander's death. Alexander the Great may have died young, but his impact on history was profound. He was a man of contradictions, both a ruthless conqueror and a visionary leader, a warrior and a scholar. His ambition, courage, and charisma have made him a legend, a figure whose story continues to captivate and inspire people around the world. More than 2 millennia after his death, Alexander remains one of the most famous figures in history. His name is synonymous with greatness, and his legacy lives on in the cities he founded, the cultures he influenced, and the stories of his incredible conquests. This was Alexander the Great, the man who sought to conquer the world, and in many ways, succeeded. As we walk through the bustling cities and examine the ruins of the past, it's clear that Alexander's influence transcends time and borders. His legacy is not just in the battles he fought or the territories he conquered, but in the lasting impact he had on the world. Make sure to subscribe, drop a comment below, and let us know which historical event or figure you're curious about next. Your feedback helps shape our content, and we love to hear from you.